And I'm Lauren French, the Creekside Family Resource Coordinator. Today we are offering a Parent Coffee Cafe. It's an opportunity for our parents to come out and have an informal conversation with our administrators. This morning the topic is strengthening families. We had Ms. Atcher to discuss her guidance counseling services, and we had Mr. Brandon Sahan with the next step to give us some tips on how to strengthen our family.
I'm Ms. Atcher. I am the guidance counselor. So I'm just going to kind of share with you today. A lot of times I'm kind of everywhere, but some people don't really know what I do with a student. So I thought I would just share with you what I do each week with the children here at school. I normally do not dress this way, but today is National Down Syndrome Day. And so we are wearing this in honor of our friends that have Down syndrome. So just to preface this, we're wearing crazy socks and then our shirts that say that they have 3 of the 21st chromosomes. So I knew I was presenting this morning, but I wanted to also recognize that just to build awareness for our friends, okay? And again, like I said, I'm Ms. Atcher. I gave everyone a sticker. If you came in late, I will give you a sticker. They came home early in the year in your kid's agenda, and it basically is just a link to my webpage where, you get the last one, where I kind of try to keep up with what I do each month with the students. Can you flip that bottom light, please, Heather, so you can see better? When you go into the link at the bottom, it's the red link. If you type that in, it will take you directly to my webpage. Again, I wear many hats. You'll see me in the morning car line. You'll see me running around here. Whatever needs to be done, I try to do it. But my main focus is to share and try to build relationships with the students. And I tell them when they come to class with me, I have them in class each week, and I tell them, I'm not giving you a test, I'm not grading you on anything, so they're all excited about that. But basically, I'm trying to teach them things that they will remember 20 years from now. Life skills that sometimes we miss. You know, teachers have a lot on their plate and things like that. So I try to reinforce some of those things in the classroom to help the teachers as well. So this is just kind of a brief overview. It also talks about if you ever need anything, I do have an open door policy. I'm not going to promise I'm sitting there, but if you need me, feel free to walk in at any time if I'm available. I'll do my best to answer questions, and if you need something I cannot answer, then I'll try my best to find out the answer for you. When you go to the web page, I was just going to share with you a little bit. Miss Lauren, will you click on the guidance outline? So that kind of takes us to what I talk about each month with the students. The way we have it set up is they come, I have class all day on Thursday. So if you try to call me and I'm in class on Thursdays, that's because it's blocked off. Because you know as well as I do, if I don't have something set in a schedule, I can get pulled different directions and then I don't get to work with the children. So this is on Thursdays. This is what I cover with the kids. They come in here. Each classroom has a set time that they come in every Thursday. So when I finish here, I'll start with my 5th grade. I also added preschool this year, which has been fantastic. They start my morning at 8:30. So whether I'm ready to go or not at 8:30, preschool gets me ready really quick. So these are things that we've already talked about this year, and we're in March and we're talking about careers. So today we're following up. We're doing like an interest inventory with 2nd through 5th grade to kind of identify what interests they like. And I know they're young, but my daughter's in 8th grade and she had to choose a career path when she went to high school this year. So they're having to develop those interests a lot earlier than what they have in the past. I mean, when I graduated, I didn't have a clue. When I was a sophomore, I didn't have a clue what I wanted to do. So they're trying to just build and figure out what the kids are interested in at a young age. So that's what we're talking about this year. But if you're ever interested in what I'm discussing each month, it's on this. And then I've missed a few months because, of course, things get busy. But I try to put in here go to October, Lauren. This was something we talk about choices and basically go right there. And it just talks about, choices. People make choices every hour, every day. They learn to ask, is it kind, is it safe, and is it healthy? And so we talked about making the right choices, and you make choices every day of your life. And depending on the choices you make could depend on how it affects your day or affects your future. So that was something. When they come in here as well, you'll see I have a bookcase over here. So I start the journals with them each day when they come in here. They all have their journals on their desk, and they have their objective that they go over each day when we're in here. So the objectives on the board, they've erased I don't have it up here for today yet because I knew you all were coming in. But we have our expectations, but then they also have their objective. This rolls over each year. So for example, this little gal is a 5th grader. So she has her journal from 1st grade. And it talks about each month what we have discussed. So if I'm in class and I want to refer back to what we talked about last year in October, I'll just have the kids flip back and it has it dated and it has the objective. So this is not only something that we use each day, because I found before I started this, I don't know why I didn't start this from the beginning, I was always like, okay, everybody pass out paper, and then we got papers flying everywhere. So this is just kind of like a cumulative journal of what we've discussed in guidance. And I do not read them, so there's a lot of reflection in here too, and it's theirs. They don't have to share it with their friends. I tell them sometimes we do have share time, but they do not have to share it with their friends, and this is something that they can actually take with them when they leave here in 5th grade. So if they've been here since 1st grade, kindergartners, we don't start that with them because they're doing good to get their name written, and this would just send them. So we do more stories and things with our kindergarten, but in 1st grade they start their journals. So, if you ever have questions about what we're talking about, you're more than welcome to come in and look through their journals. But for example, this was we talked about good hygiene. Last year we did a whole lesson on manners. Just because we take for granted that, yes, we try to teach our kids manners, but not everybody is taught manners at home. And it was like the top 30 manners that kids need to know by the time they exit 5th grade. So, I try to hit, like I said, a lot of different areas, but I don't test them. It's just more or less life skills. I always joke, I say, when you're married and sitting at your dinner table 40 years from now or 20 years or whenever, I want you to say, I remember my guidance counselor from elementary school that taught me whatever it was. So that's what I'm trying to instill in them. Another thing that I really like about having them in class each week is I build relationships. So they have me in class, so if they know and we build that relationship, if they need something outside of class, that my door is open. And on the days that I do not have class, I do more individual. This year I have started a lunch bunch, so every week I have a certain grade level, and the teachers send me 3 names from each classroom, and we come in here and we just have like a lunch group. There's no set schedule, there's no routine, we just sit down and I really learn a lot. They love to talk, they like to get out of the cafeteria. So that's something that I have been fortunate enough, thanks to Ms. Weepert this year, to do, and then also small groups. I have a couple small groups that I've worked with this year of some students who had anxiety or they're nervous about something, and we just do little activities throughout the year to help them. And I try to have that group on Monday if nothing interferes, just to try to start their week out on the right foot, and if they need anything. I do, on the days, if you all ever need anything, parents, you're more than welcome to come in or schedule an appointment if you all need anything. I do chair a lot of the special education meetings just to let you know what else I do. And then 504s, that's also something that I work with. But I've really tried this year to spend more time with the kids. And I know you all have probably seen in the news, counselors are very, not just elementary counselors, but like mental health counselors and things like that. Those are very on high, we need them in the schools. And so my focus this year has been to spend more time with the children. And sometimes kids just come in. I have a couch in my office. Sometimes they just come in and they just sit down and they just want to talk to me. And that's perfectly fine. Sometimes they just need somebody to listen that's not in the setting where they live that they just need to talk about. Sometimes they need help with conflict with girls. That's something else that we go over for whatever reason. When they get to 4th and 5th grade, girl drama starts. I'm sorry for anybody who has girls. I have 3, so I need all the extra help I can get in that area. But, and I'm a big advocate too in kids need to handle their own conflicts. I know a lot of times it's easy for the parents to want to jump in. If they come to me, like I've had a lot of girls in the last month or two, whatever reason, it starts to ramp up right at the end of school. And they'll come and they'll have a conflict with something. And I just talk to them. I let them. Sometimes the kids are so busy that they don't have time to sit down and just talk to each other. They're just seeing the conflict that's arising. So, for example, the other day I had some girls that came in and sat down and they were like, having a disagreement. I said, well, have you all had time? And they were like, well, we don't have time to sit down when there's not other people around. So I let them just come to my office. They sat down, said, I'm going to give you 5 minutes, try to work out whatever it is that you are having trouble with, and then I'm going to come in if I need to help after that. And then after 5 minutes, they were perfectly fine. They just needed to talk about it. So, that's kind of how I handle conflicts. And of course, sometimes it doesn't go that way, and sometimes we need adults to intervene. But I try to teach kids to try to solve the problems on their own and work things out. So I know that's a lot of information. Miss Lauren said I had X amount of time because she knows I like to talk. But that's just kind of an overview of what I do each week. If you need something, like I said, if I'm not available, you can send me an email, you can call, you can leave a message, and I will do my best to get back to you in a timely manner. We appreciate you being here. I think it's very important for your students to see that you're here and there's a relationship between the school and home. So that's very important, and we do appreciate you being here. And then the second part of our program is Mr. Brandon. Mr. Brandon is one of our therapists that comes and works with students at the school each week, and so he's going to just share a little bit of the services that he provides and kind of what he does.
I've actually been connected to Creekside since 2010. It's hard to believe I've been here that long. Started here just kind of working in counseling. So I am a counselor, I'm a psychotherapist at a private practice in Elizabethtown. It's called the Next Step Counseling Services. And so I am primarily there. So I don't work for the schools. The schools allow me to be able to come in and to meet with some of the kiddos, and that's what I've been doing here at Creekside. And we have many other therapists at our office that do that full-time at all of the other schools in Hardin County. So that's a little bit about us, that's a little bit about me, but maybe some of the meaty stuff I think is going to be maybe more important for you guys is parenting stuff. Now, when people meet me, they're kind of like, you're different. And so I'm 42, I've been with my wife 21, 22 years, and I am a parent, I am a father. And none of that is easy at all. So let's just get that out of the way. I like to be real, I like to be honest, and so when we're talking about parenting, I want to be very raw and honest with you guys. And so I had to write some stuff down because I'm going to talk about really 3 big points today. And you guys are free to ask some questions and stuff, and I'm going to engage you throughout this process. But I want you guys to maybe think about some questions with this because I'm not going to give you typical parenting tools. I'm going to talk about some things that are going to be very real and maybe kind of raw and maybe kind of vulnerable and very kind of honest because it's near and dear to me. Whatever I share with you, it really comes also from my own story, my own experience. Not because I'm an expert at all with any of that. So the 3 things I'm going to talk about today is what is known as parenting from the inside out. Parenting from the inside out. I'll talk about what that is. And then I want to talk about being intentional in parenting. And the third thing I want to talk about is playful parenting. Playful parenting and how that links up with discipline rather than punishment. Okay, and so those are the 3 things I want to talk about. So to begin that, I'm an individual that loves symbols. I love metaphors. If you were to come to my office in E-Town and see my office, it's full of stuff. And they look at it, people that come in, they say, you work with kids. And honestly, primarily, I don't. I'd say probably about 3 to 4% of what I do is kid-based. Most of what I do is individual. I work with parents. I do individual type stuff. I'm the marriage guy. I'm the couple guy. That's my gig. So people look at that. I have stuff all over the place. And this is one of the things that stands in my office. And if you could see this, this is one of those pop figures that sometimes you see all over the place. And this guy's a little special guy to me because I don't know if you can recognize. He's got like a sweater on. Sweater, yeah, I'm a sweater guy. He's got these nice blue tennies, and he's got this little trolley that he holds. Anybody can recognize who this cat is?
Fred Rogers.
Fred Rogers, yeah, also known as Mr. Rogers. I love this guy. I really do. And I want to open up by reading, actually, he loved talking about parenting, and he loved talking about family. That was his heart. And honestly, if you get a chance, there was a recent documentary that came out last year, because last year was the 50th anniversary of Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. It's a fantastic documentary that covers his whole life and really what he was really wanting to do and wanting to accomplish. So I want to read this. This is what he wrote to parents, and he's speaking as a parent, and this is towards the end of his life. He said, "When a baby is born, parents often feel that they would like to give that baby a perfect life. It's a very natural feeling, but of course, not a very realistic one." Love that. Especially if perfection to those parents means no trouble, no tears, no fights, constant providing for every need every minute. Every parent soon discovers that kind of perfection is far from possible. Thank you, Mr. Rogers. Even if it was desirable. Nighttime feedings, diaper changes, and stomach pains, and growing pains, and jealousies, and all the rest enter the picture very early, and parents are forced to realize, often sadly, that the perfect, untroubled life is just a fantasy. It's just a fantasy. In daily living, tears and fights and doing things for ourselves are all part of our ways of developing into an adult. Isn't that good stuff? I love that. So that leads me to really want to talk about that there is no handbooks to parenting. I kind of wish there was. So my daughter is, 7th, getting ready to go into 8th grade, and I remember day one when my wife left my daughter with me. She was about 4 months old, so this is about 2006. I was Miss Daddy Mommy. I was like Mr. Mom. So any of you remember that Michael Keaton movie, or remember actually maybe hearing about it? That was me, except I wasn't in the flannels and I wasn't watching soap operas, even though I kind of probably felt like I needed to. So I remember day one when my wife went back to work, because we were at a shift at the time. Life isn't perfect. I was working a second shift sort of job. I was working on a unit in Louisville. We were living out in Meade County in Brandenburg. And so I was working second shift. My wife had to go back to work, and she hands me this kid and says, "Here you go." I was like, oh my. I'll never forget the first diaper change. I remember I called her not after 30 minutes that she was at work. I said, "We have an emergency stat. I need some assistance here." And that's actually what kicked off. And so, eventually we kind of got it going and got it together. But I did that for 2 years. And so I had like firsthand accounts of many of what you all are doing. A lot of dads don't get that privilege to be able to do that. I had that privilege because that was the scenario. Not necessarily because I chose it, because that was just the scenario, so I had to go with it. And did I do it perfect? No. But much of what I'm going to tell you comes out of that experience of those 2 years. I will tell you this, that my daughter and I have a pretty tight bond. And even though there's a lot of research behind what I'm going to talk to you about in these next short little bit, I got a chance to live it. And I didn't even know it was actually the research that was there. So the first thing I want to say is that obviously there is no handbooks to, parenting our kids. There is no handbooks at all. And with that being said, I really want to talk about the fact that there is no parenting experts in here. I almost feel like that's an oxymoron. It's kind of like self-contradictory. I think that if any of us could say that we're a parenting expert, we're going to find out really quickly an area that we're not. So there is no such thing as parenting experts. What I want you to hold on to is this phrase here, because I wrote down some things. I want this to kind of stick with you. Who we are is a much more accurate predictor of how our kids will do than what we know about parenting. Or maybe to put it this way, there was a guy, his name was Joseph Chilton Pierce. He said this. He says, what we are teaches our children more than what we say. What we are teaches our children more than what we say. How many of you have ever heard, and maybe these things came out of your mouth before, do as I say, not as I do? How many of you heard that at some point, okay? We've heard that, and maybe some of us have maybe said that because it's like we just give up. We're just do as I say, do my bidding, in those frustrating moments. But it's actually the other way around. What we are teaches our children more than what we say. So here's the thing. So we must be what we want our children to become. We must be what we want our children to become. So here's the thing with this. We are to be the adults that we want our children to become. This is what I call parenting from the inside out. We have to parent from the inside out. Now, this is the part that I'm probably going to spend the most of the time with because it's the hardest. And, you know, truthfully speaking, there's a woman who has really impacted me. Her name is Brené Brown. And Brené Brown has written a number of books that deals with shame and guilt, and I'll just say a couple of things about that in a moment. But she talks a lot about wholeheartedness, that we need to do everything from a place of wholeheartedness. And wholeheartedness is that we're kind of like connected. We're showing up as our fullest. But you know what one of the reasons why we don't show up wholeheartedly is because we deal internally with this thing called worthiness. I want you to hear this for a second because this, I believe, is a struggle for all of us, if we're going to be honest. And one of the biggest reasons, I would say one of the number one barriers to us being the parents that we really can be. I'm going to just hear me on this. This is so huge. And this is why you're thinking, oh, this is a little bit different than the parenting like tips that I was thinking of. But the worthiness issue. Because we end up looking at the concept of worthiness with prerequisites. Meaning this, I'm only going to be worthy if. I'm going to be only worthy when. I'm going to be worthy when we get to this place in our life. I'm going to be only worthy if this works out. I'm only going to be worthy if I lose a ton of pounds. I'm going to only be worthy if I get this job. I'm going to be worthy when I get to this place in life with my family, with this situation, all of those different sorts of things. And when we do that, and if you talk to yourself like that, who doesn't, by the way? I mean, I know that I do. And when we're living from this place of worthiness, what we're doing is we're setting ourselves up. We're setting ourselves up to live from a place of scarcity, which I'll talk a little bit more about in a second. Worthiness is really about us being as we are, not as we should be. It's not about if and when. You're not going to be worthy if this happens or when this happens. I think sometimes society and culture is wanting to tell us that. So think about this for a second, how this translates over to how you show up with your kids. If you show up with yourself with worthiness prerequisites, think about this question. What prerequisites are we knowingly or unknowingly communicating to our children? Our children are really good at picking up on a lot of unspoken stuff. What prerequisites are we communicating to them? Because essentially our role, I'll just tell you, our number one role as parents is to be able to foster an environment of belonging and love. Loving and belonging. And anything that we do comes back to that prime directive. But if we ourselves have a reference point that we don't think that we're worthy, do you not think that's going to probably spill over sometimes in the way that we show up to our kids? Absolutely it will. It's been a part of my story. I mean, I did not have a posh upbringing. I had a very rough upbringing. I grew up, was born in Pennsylvania, moved to Florida, lived in 26 different houses. There were times where I was homeless. There was times where I was living with some of my parents' friends. You know, we were living out of the back of a car sometimes. And my mother was really young. She was 17 when she had me. Did the best that she could. But it wasn't easy. It wasn't easy at all. And a lot of her difficulty that she had that was handed down to her spilled over to me. So I learned really quickly this worthiness concept. I'm only going to be worthy if. I'm only going to be worthy when. And I became really aware of that, especially when I started raising my daughter. When I found out that I was going to be a father, the first thing that I didn't think about was joy. The first thing was like, you know, I was like really concerned. I was really, really anxious inside because the one thing I didn't want to do, and I was already doing counseling, I was already in the master's program, I was already doing all this stuff, is like I didn't want my stuff to spill over. And I was petrified about that. And little did I realize that I actually had already what I needed inside, but I had to take a risk to do this. We must be honest about what things that we communicate to our kids if we're not aware of it. Do you know what the enemy of worthiness is? Shame. Shame is the enemy of worthiness. And we need to think about this. What do you think is the difference between shame and guilt? Anybody? Anybody think they know what the difference is between shame and guilt? Sometimes they're used interchangeably, but they really are different. They mean different things. Shame is this. Shame is I am bad. I am bad. It's what I am, what I believe about myself. Guilt is I did something bad. So here's an example. You have a student, you have one of your children, grandchildren, you look at them, you say, bad girl. That's shame. Here's guilt. Good girl, but really bad choices. Do you hear the difference? Good girl, but really bad choices, rather than just bad girl. So there was a study that was committed, years ago that followed a group of 5th graders and tracked them all the way through to 12th grade. Fascinating study. And they looked at indicators within their own lives, I think through, in part, guidance counselors and stuff helped them with this, of those that were more shame-prone and those that were more guilt-prone. And the shame-prone were ones that just said about themselves, I'm stupid, I'm worthless, I can't do anything right, all of those sorts of things. They tracked those shame individuals all the way to about 12th grade. And what they ended up finding is that with the 12th graders, that they had higher risks of doing negative choices, self-harming behaviors, suicide potential, getting involved in drugs, and all those different sorts of things for those that had high indicators of shame all the way back in 5th grade. It's fascinating. On the other hand, those that were guilt-prone, those that said things like, oh, I really messed up, or I could do better, I didn't do really good this time, that understanding led them to not necessarily be excluded from difficulties, but what they did do is they did manage to go on, try out to go to college, be successful in some sort of job after school or whatever, and they were resilient. They were resilient. So shame does make an impact. So what needs to be communicated, I believe, to our children is that I love who you are, but these choices and behaviors are not acceptable. I really love who you are, but these choices and behaviors are not acceptable. Does everybody understand that and hear that difference? So how can we communicate that? How can we work that into how we relate with our kids? A lot of times I think we look at our 18 to 24-month-old kiddos here, and once we have in between birth to 3 years of age, 3 or 4 years of age, you know what you're going to find? You're going to find little kids that are going to be very strong about rebelling, okay? It's not because they're wanting to be disobedient, it's just because they're wanting naturally just to rebel. You got any little rebellioners in your house? I remember with my daughter, especially in her high chair in those lovely first 2 years, she was very much, and still to this day, a very strong-willed little girl. Very strong-willed little girl. And so he'd say, honey, you need to be able to eat this. And so, of course, she didn't like a lot of kids don't like peas. And I don't know why I decided to still serve her peas or why that is even a good idea, but I remember one time as the peas were there, she looked at the peas and she looked at me and she held the peas over her high chair and looked at me and made direct eye contact. She was like, boop, 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 boop. And I watched it and I was like, Zoe, that's her name. Zoe, what are you doing? And that was just part of her. And this is the reason why. The whole point of that for children of that age is that they need to make an individuation, a separation between the caregiver and who they are. Sometimes we're going to look at that, especially with preschoolers, that they're just being disobedient. They're not being disobedient. They really want to know that there's a difference between them and the caregiver. Even that's going to be the days you're going to pull every last loving hair that you have out. That's going to be those times. Now, when those kids grow up into, for instance, 8, 9, 10 years of age, here's when they really begin to internalize. They're already individually separated now, but now they're really trying to discover what do they believe about themselves. And this is where it's huge, where as they hear from us to them, how they believe about themselves. So this is where the guilt and shame component is huge. And again, shame is that what they come to believe about themselves. So when you say, you need to focus on the choices, like, was this a good choice? This wasn't a good choice, was it? I really love you. I really see that you're gifted in this and all these other things, but we have to learn to separate what they do from who they are. We have to separate from what they do from who they are. And that's going to be hard for us. It's going to be very hard for us because all of us are kind of growing with our kids. So we're always on the job training. This is why I say there's no perfect parents. We're always just kind of growing with them. So we have to become mindful of making sure that we're not using shame language. That's the point, hands down. So Brene Brown that I mentioned before, she obviously is a shame researcher, and she talks about this stuff. And her kids, she had a 6-year-old son, and they had this little dog named Daisy. And Daisy, just loved to misbehave with Brene when her husband was out. And so, the dog would jump up, small little dog, little Jack Russell or something, would jump up, get up on the table and eat stuff and get down. And there was this time where, the 6-year-old is over here, the little dog comes up, Brene's cooking dinner, and the dog jumps up, grabs a little bite of a snack, and then runs away. And what Brene says is, "Bad Daisy, bad Daisy." Now, Charlie, which is her 6-year-old son, says, "Now, Mommy, Daisy's not a bad dog. She's just a dog that is making bad choices." And so she really picked it up on really quick. And this is for a 6-year-old that really kind of picked up on that. And so I think that was really telling and really funny. So parenting from the inside out, we have to be very open and honest about where we are, being aware of what's behind our words and what we're sharing. Okay, so that's the first thing. And the two last things are going to be a little bit quicker here. The second thing is about being intentional in our parenting. What do you think it means to be intentional? Anybody know that? What does it mean? Think about what we're doing. Following through, okay? Planning, just being aware that there's, to be intentional is that there's an intent behind what I say. There's an intent behind what I do. And so with that being said, it's about setting boundaries and knowing limits. Okay, so we live in a day and age where electronics are everywhere, right? It's almost like a part of our culture. Whether it's tablets, whether it's Xboxes, whether it's PlayStations, whether it's, whatever else. There's YouTubes. I mean, there's like all kinds of things. And that's something that obviously I didn't have growing up. I mean, me growing up in the 80s, the only thing electronically speaking was the Nintendo Entertainment System. That was about it, and that was fun and that was cool. But everything now is electronically based. And what is actually interesting is that makes an impact on kids and their social development, because most kids are actually relying on social media, their social interaction through electronic devices, than they are actually seeing each other face to face. And they're actually beginning to see a major impact on that. And actually, I've seen 16-year-olds that come in that said, I don't really have any friends, but I have tons of friends, but I don't see anybody on a face-to-face basis. You know what reason why? Because they've been relating with people on the Xbox who are friends from all over the country, but what they end up doing is they don't really have any friends themselves. So one of the things we have to do is learn how to be able to set limits and boundaries with that. So what I did with Zoe really early on, and this is going to seem kind of crazy because people think that I'm nuts, is that I only allow her, still to this day, to have 30 minutes of screen time during the week, during the school week. So Monday through Friday, it's only 30 minutes of screen time. Now it's going to seem murderous, especially to some kids. That's going to be like, how do you do that, right? So how do you do that sometimes when maybe we haven't had any limits and we've just kind of let them go? You got to maybe span it back, start small, maybe cut it back to an hour or whatever, but also be able to communicate there's going to be more time on the weekend. So my daughter only has 30 minutes during the week, but she has an hour on the weekend. So what are we doing during the week? Well, during the week, I'm not sure what your schedule's like, but it's nuts at the Sahine household, Monday through Friday, of trying to figure out how we're doing stuff. So my daughter does horse lessons, she does Taekwondo, and she's in middle school, so she gets a bunch of homework. math to be exact, which is thankfully my wife's job, because I don't do that, so I never did that really well when I was in school. So she deals with that. But, to get all of that done, there has to be some sort of schedule, some sort of boundaries, some sort of limits. Dinner table conversation is really huge, and I don't know if any of us really have an opportunity for that as much, because all of our schedules are going to be different. But we need to be intentional about how are we allowing our kids to exist. They will love to have 5 hours after school. They will love to stay up until all hours of the night. Your kids may be staying up all hours of the night, and they may not even let you know that. But you might want to reel that back in just a little bit. The last thing I want to talk about is playful parenting, and this is what's really important to me, playful parenting. What in the world is playful parenting? Playful parenting has come out a lot recently as studies that have been done that, how many of your kids like to play? Yeah, okay, some, yeah. How many of you play with your kids? Okay, so here's my journey of playing with my daughter, and honestly, not because I knew this research, but because I ended up just kind of doing it, and I'm going to tell you how difficult it was for my wife, okay, because there's two different ways of looking at this. Play for me comes natural. So when my daughter and I were kind of left alone, our first entry into play was reading stories. So I would read her stories, and I would use voices, and I would use different inflections and stuff. And she got into it and loved it, and so we read lots and lots of books together. As she got older, we moved into Thomas the Tank Engine. And so we had the Thomas trains, and what we would do is we would create adventures together. We would create these little stuff, and so I would go wherever she was going. I wouldn't dictate the play, but I would let her go, and she would come in with Gordon, and I'd come in with Percy, and and Toby, and we would have these conversations together. And little do you know that you may look at that, at what a child does, and think like, what's really significant about that? There's actually so much, because they're communicating so much through play, and the fact that when you get a chance to drop down with them on that level and you're playing with them, they are actually doing what you did with your firstborn or your first grandchild when you looked at them and they looked at you and you formed a bond. Remember that? You remember that moment that you held your firstborn, you held that child, there was this attachment that you had. They find, studies have shown, that this is still continuing the attachment through play. What is said is that for children, there's what is known as the power of play, and they liken it to the zone of like an athlete. When an athlete is in the zone, he's ready, she's ready, Or what they know is that when they're in the flow. To children, when they're at play, that is their zone. And it's incredible, the stuff that can be communicated there. So there's a whole bunch of stuff that's happening now within therapy to kids of what is known as play therapy. Play therapy is happening all over the place. A lot of therapists and a lot of my therapists at my office are actually doing play therapy with kids, because they're getting a chance to be able to communicate with them. Because what you're doing is you're communicating relationship at the same time as building a sense of trust. That's what you're doing. You're sharing relationship and building this attachment with trust. So for us, it went from Thomas the Tank Engine to Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles to Masters of the Universe. We're going outside, running around in the backyard. She's She-Ra, I'm He-Man. We're fighting Skeletor and all of these other things. But here's the thing, did my daughter, was it about me just becoming her best friend? No. I ended up becoming her play partner, but here's the thing that's fascinating. Would she have negative behaviors? Oh, absolutely she would. Absolutely she would have negative behaviors. So what happened is that when the negative behaviors arose, or when she was disrespectful, because we have this attachment, there was a sense of trust that we already had, we could sit down and talk with each other, and I would say, honey, again, going back to the shame piece, honey, what you did here and what you said here really makes me sad. And honey, I know that you're capable of so much more. I know that you are really special, and you know how special you are to me, but this here. And so that gave so much more authority to the intervention of engaging my daughter in the midst of her negative choices and her negative behaviors. Now, I said that my wife didn't necessarily have the easiest time with this. So her having difficulty of playing, because I remember my wife early on, our daughter's 3, she says, play doesn't come easy, it's really awkward, it's really strange, I don't know what to do, I don't know how to hold action figures. I mean, I could just tell her about cooking or whatever else. And for her, it was a little bit of a stretch. There is no perfect playing. Sometimes it's just don't take yourself too seriously. And roll down on the floor if you can. Just make sure you can get back up, or whatever. Just allow yourself to just be silly. Allow yourself to just relax, because when they see that, they really begin to trust what you're going to say. And to be honest, I know this is true because this is what I've been doing with many of your students here. Some people, they say, oh, Brandon's so good with kids. No, I'm not. I'm really not. All that I do with them is I play with them on their level. And you know what happens through play? And play can be communicated at different ages, from those that are really young all the way up to about their 5th grade, is that when we're in 5th grade, we're still using metaphor, we're still talking about play type stuff, but now they start talking about really serious things. And then I said, well, what about this? Or what about this? Or how do you think it connects to this? To whatever their interest is. And you just see, they're just zoned, they're right connected, they're right there. And you know what? You can do the same thing. You can do the same thing. It's just really, really incredible. Here's a recent example. So my daughter, how many of y'all have teenagers? Okay, yeah, okay. If you don't worry. You'll be ready when it happens, on-the-job training. But so our daughter is shifting really deep into the depth of the teenage years, kind of like Mary Donna was talking about here, Miss Hatcher, with her 8th grader. And it is interesting because my daughter and I still do play. We'll occasionally do video games together. We actually will still to this day, because it's something that we've been doing now for the past 10 years, we have known as He-Man Day, He-Man and She-Ra Day. And so I've been recollecting all my original toys from 1982. And they're actually going to be her collection too. And periodically we would take them all out and look at them all. And what we used to do, I don't know if she's going to be crazy about it now, but we would just make up different episodes and stuff. But what we do now, because of that, we had an encounter this past week where my daughter, obviously, as all girls at that age that are shifting into teenage years, she was very, 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 very emotional this day. And nothing was going to make it right. Nothing was going to make it right. And I had to know really quickly that I was not going to be able to make it right. I had to almost just become a container for her in the midst of the storm of emotions that she was going through. And the storm of the emotions was centered on math that day, and how Mommy wasn't really listening to me and the way that the teacher said it, and she's doing it different than the way the teacher said it, and that was the touchstone. But what it is that ended up being the lightning rod for everything else that was going on. And so, by the way, on the side, my wife and my daughter have kind of like a catastrophic relationship. And I say catastrophic because they're like oil and vinegar, but they still go together. Okay, so they really love each other very, very, very much, but they're always at odds. But my daughter will tell her lots and lots of things too. So I'm in the midst listening to all this. I'm seeing my wife get amped up because my daughter knows what buttons to push, and my wife, and so she'll push those. And my wife comes around the corner and she looks at me and she's like, "You better say something because I'm getting ready to lose it." And I'm like, oh, all right, okay. So normal household, right? Anybody you have that? So I come up, and of course my daughter, she's really keyed up. She's really there, and she starts yelling. And I hold that gaze with her, and she's making this impossible, drastic, crazy story. And I looked at her and I said, Zoe, I said, we're going to have to cut this off. I said, honey, do you want Daddy to pull out the lion? And she's like, and she knows what that meant, is that because I can be one of her best and safest places, but the lion comes out to keep things safe. Not to destroy, but to keep things safe. And the lion ends up saying, this is over and we're done with this conversation. And it holds it and it contains it. And she knows that it's not threatening to her and it's not a judgment to her, but she knows that there is going to be a limit to this. And I had to pull out the line, and she looked at me and she goes, "All right, Daddy." And she turns and she closes her door. Not slamming it, but she closes it. I leave her in there for about an hour, go in and check on her, follow up with her. "So what's going on here?" She goes, "Well, I was just getting a little emotional." Okay, because she's a daughter of a therapist, right? So, she's very much in touch with this, okay? So maybe your daughter or son doesn't necessarily have to say that, but she was very much aware of that. So that's playful parenting, and you understand that that is actually tied with discipline rather than punishing. So what do you hear is the difference between disciplining versus punishing? What do you hear in the words? What is different? Positive and negative. Anybody else? What's going to be positive? What's the positive word? Discipline or punishment? Discipline. Punishing is like, whoa, it can be sometimes shaming. And for some of us, we're going to go with what we know, a lot of times. I, as a kid growing up, I wasn't disciplined, man. I was punished. I was severely punished a lot of times. I'm not saying that was like the right thing to do, by any means. But punishment a lot of times is going to carry over into that shame piece that I said at the beginning. Because if we're punishing, a lot of times the kids, it actually, what they've seen is that this issue of punishment, and even sometimes, and everybody can show up and do their own thing, but even physical punishment a lot of times, what that does, and you guys can take this research and go with it, but it actually damages the attachment. It damages the attachment. It damages the attachment that was established. And what kids learn to do, because if they have more of a punishing aspect of how that they are shaped and molded, what ends up happening with this then is that they end up finding ways to not necessarily tell the truth, or really finding ways to not get caught. So as they get to be like high schoolers, they're going to find ways to make sure that you need to know what you need to know, and they're not going to tell you everything, because they're just become really good at learning how to avoid punishment, okay? So if we allow ourselves to say, okay, so how do we discipline rather than punish? Well, it's based first on attachment. You have to have the relationship first in order to do the discipline. There is no relationship with punishment. So I'm going to give you an intervention and maybe just a recommendation. So if you have elementary school kids, there is a great little program, parenting curriculum, that you can get on Amazon. It's called 1, 2, 3 Magic. It's really good. You can get it in a book. You can watch this DVD. It's by this child psychologist. His name is Dr. Phelan. I remember when I first watched this in 2009, 2010-ish, because again, I mentioned that our daughter is very strong-willed. I remember watching this and looking at it and saying, what a load of hippy-dippy malarkey. That's actually what I initially thought. Because I'm like saying, this is what I thought. This is just a glorified timeout is what I really thought it was. Until I really got to see the mechanics of how this worked out. And I took a risk and said, I'm just going to give it a shot and implement it and see how this works. Now, in order for this to work, you got to make sure that everybody, all the caregivers in the household, are on the same page. You can't have just you going out, like a bandit, wanting to give it a shot, and your significant other or whoever else is in the house is not going to be on the same page with you. So if you have parents who live with you, other caregivers that live with you, your significant other, whoever, they have to be on the same page with this in order for it to work. But it's 1, 2, 3 magic, and the magic part, it almost seems that way for a reason. Let me tell you why. So I'm just going to give you the basics of it. What it is about is it's based on relationship, and it's based on preserving the relationship. So my daughter, very strong-willed little girl, she would just be like, can we do this, can we do this, can we do this? I don't want to do this, I don't want to do this. You're not going to make me, I'm not going to do this, I'm not going to do this. And so it deals with counting. And so when you get to this point where you've already redirected him or her and said, honey, no, or no, I don't want you to do that, or stop that, you've redirected a few times, then you say, that's 1. And that's all you do. You're not going to keep talking now, by the way. Stop talking at that point. I remember I had to work with my wife on this because my wife loved to talk. She goes, that's one. And you know what comes after one, don't you? Do you know what comes after one? And of course my daughter would get really smart. She goes, two. And I know what comes after that, too. It'd be three. She goes, how high are we going to count? Ooh, it's like, oh, it's hard. So we had to scale this back and saying, don't talk, don't talk. So once you get to the counting phase of the 1, 2, 3, you got to say, that's one. And you make eye contact with them, not with any sort of gesture of anger or frustration, but almost like a blank gaze. And you say, that's one. And the first time that you do that, they're going to be like, that's one what? Because they're wanting to engage you. They're going to be like, what's that mean? One what? And so you just go about doing what you're doing. You're not playing in. You're doing kind of like a little plant ignoring little deal, not buying into it. And so they're going to try you to see what's going to come after this. Because it's an adventure for them. So they're going to try it. So they're going to be like, one what? So what is this about? I don't know. Well, anyways, who cares about with this one stuff? Well, I just want to go ahead and do this. And they'll go on and on and on and on. And so, again, you're not saying anything. And you come back to it and you say, blank gaze, right? Eye contact, that's two. Two? Two for this? Two for what? What is this? You're not listening to me. And just like they'll just go on rolling around and everything else. And you let that go for just a very little bit. You're still not buying into it. You're still fixing dinner, doing whatever it is in the house, whatever, not buying into their, shenanigans at that point. And then lastly, you say, if they're still going on with it, that's 3. So depending on how old they are, if they're a 5-year-old, you say, that's 3, go to your room, take 5. Go take 5 in your room. And so it's going to take a little bit to kind of get this working because they're going to become used to it really quickly, but what are they doing when they go to their room? So if you have a 5-year-old, it's 5. If they're going to be 6 or 7, take 7. If they're going to be 8 or 9, take 8. If they're going to be 10, take 10. You got 10. And so what they're going to go in there is they're going to go in there and they're going to be yelling all the way to the room. They're going to be saying, oh, this is stupid. I don't want to do this and everything else. And you may have what is known as a room wrecker. There has been some room wreckers. They'll just go in there and they'll just take their stuff. They'll throw their stuffed animals all over the place. They'll throw their pillows. They'll do whatever else there is. Just let it happen. Don't buy into it. Just let it go. But make sure you're keeping track of time. Because if it's 5 minutes, at the end of 5 minutes, at the end of 8 minutes, at the end of 9 minutes, at the end of 10 minutes, say, okay, you can come out. Here's what not to do. Don't say, let's sit down and talk about it. And say, do you know why I sent you to your room? Please. They know exactly why you sent them to the room. You don't need to rehash it. In fact, the whole point of them actually going to the room in the first place is that they know why they're there. You don't have to rehash it because what you're doing is you're not punishing them. What you're doing is you're disciplining, or where the word disciplining comes from, discipling them in such a way that there is a boundary, and you just crossed it. And the boundary is that's where you need to be able to be in a safe place for you to be able to think about that. And then afterwards, you embrace them and love them where they are. That's the shame piece that you're not allowing to be including. So you're loving them in the midst of that, and they know the behavior or the choice that they made is actually the reason why they're there. So you say, wow, that just kind of sounds really too easy. Because here's the reality with this. We've sent our daughter, and she's done that, and then she came back out, and you know what she's done? She picked right up where she went off because she's been thinking about that for the past 5 minutes. She thinks about that for the last 8 minutes, comes out, starts going through it all over again. And what you do, you redirect it once and twice in your mind, and then you say, I'll go through it again. That's 1. That's 2. That's 3. I will tell you, at first, that's why I thought it was just a glorified timeout, and I thought it was a bunch of junk. But when I was consistent with it, and when my wife and I were both consistent with it, our strong-willed daughter ended up complying. And it doesn't matter where you are. I will tell you this, my wife became a master of it one time. In the grocery store. In the grocery store, it was beginning to go down. It's beginning to go down in aisle 7. In aisle 7, my daughter was wanting to show herself out to my wife and be difficult. And so my wife stops everything, looks at her and says, that's one. She goes, oh, that's one what? What are you going to do? We're here at Kroger. What are you going to do? Huh? What are you going to do? And she's doing this in front of all of God in creation, right? And my wife goes, that's two, and eventually goes to three. And she goes, so what are you going to do? My room's not here. And what she does, she says, follow me. And they went to the front of the store. They had the cart of groceries. She looked at one of the cashiers. She said, I'll be back for this. And she looks at my daughter, in 5 minutes. And she goes out, allows my daughter to get in the car, with the windows down, of course, and she sits there and outside of the car, and she goes, take 5. And she says, and then, my daughter's in there, she's screaming, she's yelling, I can't believe this, da-da-da-da, all this other stuff. And then afterwards, my wife's like, all right, let's go, come back out. And so it doesn't matter where you are, you got to be consistent and committed to it. We didn't have to do the 1, 2, 3 magic as much anymore by the time that she got out of elementary school, because it links to the other stuff, the playful parenting, making sure we're not shaming her, because she had this relationship, and it shifted. There was a big change. So those are the 3 things: parenting from the inside out, being intentional in parenting, which is about setting limits and boundaries, and then that last piece, of course, is playful parenting and discipline, and considering, this as a possible intervention. He actually goes through many different variations of scenarios, because it's hard for me to put it all together. But for instance, if you get a little clever kid who is 7 or 8, and they said, I'm not going to my room, you can't make me. I'm not going to my room, I'm not taking the 7, 8 minutes, and so you can do this. And because our daughter was like that, and so she said, well, I'm not going. I'm like, you know what? You have a choice. You're right. So you can go take your 7 minutes, or you can go to bed 30 minutes earlier tonight. Your choice. So she sit there and she's like, oh man. She's like, because I gave her the freedom of choice, but it's within my limits. And so she's like, fine, and she goes in, and then one time she said, fine, I'm going to bed early tonight. I'm like, okay, cool. And what ended up happening is that 30 minutes earlier made a big, significant jump, and she's like, she never really wanted to go that route again. So just being consistent and sticking to your guns on that. Well, thanks for coming. If you want to have more information about us, Lauren has got information on how you can get connected with our office or whichever. If you want to look at this before you leave and just kind of jot that down, whichever. So thank you. Appreciate it.